Today's agenda is this one. We're going to look into human-centered design, and we're going to look a little bit more into experience design, the process, the workflow, or the method, or the approach, whatever you want to call it. You're going to experiment with and implement your designs. And that way of doing things, it's called design thinking, in which we're going to look a little bit more into that approach. What is it, and why we are using that one. And finally, usability, which is a very, very important concept in terms of design. This is, of course, you as an experienced design must know the vocabulary involved and the factors involved in usability, so you can communicate better and you can justify your decisions and also explain better why a product is useful or is not useful. So we learn, and you're going to practice this with finding out usability in systems. Okay, so first let's approach with this concept, the human-centered design. It might sound really obvious, with the approach in which the human is being the center of the entire design process, and that is true. However, I would like to ask, what does it mean really? Well, you need to consider human factors, ergonomics, and usability knowledge. Exactly what I was recently mentioned with the how to explain things in terms of usability. So you need to know all those things and concepts within this obvious thing called human-centered design. And one of the issues in design that, in general, when you ask a question in terms of design, like, oh, that's obvious, that's kind of I regularly, constantly actually hear those, but that's obvious, that's common sense. But in design, you will see that those things are not these obvious things, or things that appear to be obvious. They're actually not that obvious when people start questioning the why something is obvious. And then you will see people lacking the ability to even explain those obvious things. So remember, human-centered design, and then you're talking about human factors, which in its own is a big field, it's a scientific field. So whoever is interested in user experience in general, or making a career in terms of human factors, you could look into careers like human technology interaction, in which you study all these fields or subfields, if you like. I have put here two very well-known, very popular examples of not so human-centered design. On the left one, we have the famous clipping. If you do not recognize this icon, that only means that you are, or that I'm old enough. And this is a story. When I was getting my first computer, it was in the around 2000s. Clippy was invented in '96, but I got my first computer in the 2000s. And and I opened Microsoft Word, and I suddenly started typing, and it pretty much looked like the Microsoft Word that you're using nowadays. So I started typing something, and this guy appeared. This icon appeared right there on the document on the lower right corner. And that was cool, because this is an animated clip, and all the time was just staring at me or staring at the document, moving the eyeballs, and it was very funny. That's experience. That's the initial experience. Of course, I was excited with my first computer and trying things out, trying programs out. But as I used the program more often, this guy appeared more often as well. So all of a sudden, I was typing on my document, and he was asking, "Hey, do you need help with something?" I never asked for anything, but the guy was appearing randomly in the lower right corner. So it's a certain moment I was feeling a lot of irritation, because it was time consuming. I couldn't even find a way of totally disable this feature. So and the goal of this feature was basically helping the user with Microsoft Word typing, and think of it like nowadays we have these grammar checkers, these automated grammar checkers. So but the guy was really the clipping feature was really annoying. And that was actually how this feature became super infamous, actually. And it was just a sample of a really bad design, because that was definitely not human-centered design. I mean, somebody the responsible one for designing this was definitely not considering, or definitely at least not testing enough for user experience. Of course, at the time, the user experience term was not really a wow thing; it was just emerging. So at the time, it was very, very popular another form of designing, and that was activity-centered design, in which the activity was way more important than just the human. The human was considered, of course, but how the human was feeling, how the human was thinking, that was not really a major factor in design. So what it was more important is the activity. So for example, I need to offer help. I need to help while typing when a user types in Microsoft Word. That was kind of the activity, the help itself while typing. And then they created this awesome guy for the first, the second, and the third use of the feature. But apart from that, there was a terrible mistake of Microsoft. In the end, they just had to kill the feature. On the right-hand side, you find an example of a typeface. That's Comic Sans. It's still usable. It's still to be found on the Microsoft Office suite. And it's also lacking it has some incongruency in the typeface design. So it's not the eye is not pleased. It has the letter E, and also it costs more cognition to read this type of typeface. So those are very popular examples of not so human-centered design. So that being said, let's look into the experience design and remember or recalling from the last lecture, we said that this is the core activity within user experience, right? So, and of course, there you can find many design models out there. And the one we are going to use is this one. Actually, I showed you a quick, a different graph in the previous lecture, but it actually summarizes the same. It's basically the same thing, but here's in 2 cycles. The cycle basically has 3 phases, if you like: the understanding, exploring, and materializing. And of course, we will look at this is called design thinking, and it's not by accident that we or randomly that we picked this one for you to work with. So let's understand a little bit about this design thinking approach. Okay, so what is it? In design it's hard to come to an agreement of what a concept really means, or reach consensus in a definition of many different concepts. So you can find a lot of different definitions here as well. But it's really simple. You should know. I actually see a lot of blogs, a lot of authors trying to make this thing really complicated, and it's not. The process perhaps is a little bit confusing in the beginning, but the definition itself should not be treated as a very complicated thing. So you can see it as a method and end of the story, or an approach. The way I see it, which I like to say, is a way of thinking. Some say even it's a mindset or ideology. So you can say those things about the design thinking, or even a framework. Okay, so don't think that this framework is kind of a recipe and you need to go 1, 2, 3, 4 and then repeat the cycle. No, it's a framework and you can move freely. Remember, designers are actually come up from the art background. Contradicting enough, there is not much thinking in the approach. Now, what I'm actually saying here is not that you shouldn't use your brain at all, but you should stop thinking and start doing. That is basically a principle of design thinking. So you can validate as soon as possible your concepts, your ideas. And of course, it's a human-centered design. So the human comes first, and it's in the center of every action, every decision you take before, during, and even after designing your system, your product, your service. Okay. I also leave a link here. It's the founder of IDEO. That's a company basically who popularized this term, design thinking, and explains in a very easy way and gives you a nice example of how you should approach and why you should approach design thinking. Okay, so it's a must watch. If you're wondering the why design thinking, well, first of all, you don't. One thing you should avoid is creating awesome products or services that nobody uses, right? And that nobody wants to be there, right? And you need to increase or better the chances for your design to succeed. And that's specifically why we're using design thinking, because by using this, you're drastically improving the chances that your design is creating some impact in users' lives, and that's ultimately what you should pursue if you're a user experience designer. Now, if you're still diving into history of design, and also Tim Brown, the CEO of IDEO, will tell you that the default way of solving problems is by using a convergent approach. And that is, you have a problem, you evaluate your options, and out of all these options, choices that you have, you just select the best possible one that leads to a solution, and then voila, you have your solution. So that's kind of the typical way of solving problems. Now, by applying design thinking, you are really taking a different approach, and that approach is a divergent approach, in which basically by creating prototype as soon as possible, as soon as you have have identified the problems, the user's needs, working with them together, putting them into the center, and rapidly building prototypes, you're actually creating the choices. And that's kind of changing the paradigm of solving problems. Now, this is rather a complicated or more in-depth topic. You could, and I recommend to read also the double diamond design model. And you can find many other design models that talk about convergent and divergent and combine them, these kind of approaches. So, but here the design, the objective is the design thinking allows you to solve problems in a creative ways. Okay, so it diverges. It does not converge, but it allows you to be more creative in your solutions. But one thing I should tell you is that remember that creativity on its own is not a verb. So you actually need to start doing, and that is kind of a principle in design thinking. Okay. So let's talk about usability. Again, you can find many different books, different authors, and different people not agreeing in a common definition for usability. But the one we're going to use is this one, which is defined by the ISO. Usability is the extent to which a system, product, or service can be used by specified users to achieve specified goals with effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction in a specified context of use. One of the things that you want in terms of usability is find out if your product, the product that you're designing, is actually usable, and you want to find out ASAP. The sooner, the better. So, in order to find that, of course, we need to know the factors in usability, and of course, you got to assess things. And how you're going to assess? There are many templates out there on the internet how to assess things, and then but most of the templates in terms of usability, finding usability issues, come down to these factors, usability factors. So while evaluating, you need to evaluate these factors or fields, whatever you want to call it, in terms of usability. Effectiveness is basically reaching the goal. Let's say, for example, you have a task in your system for the user registered in our system. Then if the user is able to register, then you can say the system is effective. So effectiveness is the ability of reaching those users' goals. Efficiency is the same as effectiveness, reaching the goals, but at a minimum cost. So, for example, now following with the previous example, registering in it's not the same registering in 1 hour than registering in 2 minutes, right? So now we're talking about the resources, how much of human effort are we talking about, how much of time resources are we talking about, and you are considering those. So yeah, that's why I graded out the effectiveness in there, because efficiency implicitly means already effectiveness. Satisfaction is a very subjective concept, but of course it's very important because you need to listen to and evaluate the opinions of your users, because eventually they are the ones paying for your product or service. So how pleased they have felt during the process of using your product, and you normally ask those questions to the users afterwards, or you evaluate through observation while they are using your product, and see gestures or some or things like that. And learnability has to do with how intuitive your application is, and if your application teaches me, walks me through a specific feature in an easy way, then and allows me to learn that feature of that system, then you can say learnability factor has been achieved in the system, especially for new users. You know, whenever you're trying that new application, sometimes you're feeling super lost, then you are not achieving learnability in your product's usability. Nowadays, it's very common when you are installing a new application and they walk you through. It's a little demo. It could be a video or an interactive demo in which you see an arrows, flashing arrows. It's like you can find stuff here, the menu over there. You can read messages over here. I don't know if you have depict those or try those demos. That has to do with the learnability, and of course, memorability factor has to do with if you're an active user, how well you remember a specific feature in your application, the application that you're using. If as a user, I fail to replicate an activity, a task in your system, then you are failing here as a designer in terms of memorability of your application. Okay, so you gotta make sure to make it easy for the user to memorize certain paths, perhaps, or features in general in your system. And here, this is all about psychological concepts as well, as we already mentioned in the past. And it triggers me memorability. I can tell you that if you consider memory, memory is fascinating. Memory alone is already a big topic, and how we learn, how we memorize things. It's a very interesting topic. Do you know that human in general are capable of memorizing between 4 and 6, 7 items? So that is things that if you know those topics, if you know those tricks, then you can, of course, have better design and better usability in whatever this system you are designing. So things like that. That's why a lot of good designers are psychologists. Like Don Norman, he's a psychologist and has become a designer. If you follow him and if you listen to him, he says, in the beginning, he was working as a professor. He was not considering himself as a designer, but now he does. So keep those things in mind. If you have this background knowledge in psychology, then you are have more space to become a better user experience designer. And lastly, we have the use error, and hence I did not say user error, but use error, and it has to do with with not achieving. As a user, if I'm not achieving a task in your system, then that's definitely an error. It also has to do with you name it, the different errors that the system displays, or that the user for that misinterprets due to the you name it, navigability in your system, or a location of a specific whatever items and so on. So all those are use errors. If I'm misinterpreting something since a message, for example, then it would be a use error as well. What it doesn't, the kind of errors that it does not fall into this category, and sometimes it's misunderstood, is for example, these blue screens on the Windows operating system. So that would definitely not a use error, because that's entirely, you're not testing the system itself. The system that you're designing, that's entirely outside the scope of what you are testing. So that is not a use error, of course. You will see that, I like to mention these 5 memorability errors as a general term as usability factors, but it depends actually on what book you read, and then you will see different or added error factors like accessibility, desirability, attractiveness of the product, and you name it. So there are plenty. If you want to consider them in your future tests, usability tests, welcome, but please first have a good understanding of those factors before you start evaluating those. And in reality, you always will find those 2 factors or those other factors falling into one of these categories that I'm presenting here: efficiency, satisfaction, learnability, memorability, and use error. And that has been the lecture. I also leave some WEBLIOGRAPhy and some videos that you must watch, because they are not only interesting but contribute to the concept that we just discussed briefly here, and some recommended links as usual. Thank you very much. See you next lecture.